Here's what's coming up on The World Today. More than 260 fighters taken to Russian-controlled territory from Azovstal steel plant as Ukrainian military end their mission. Plus, staying in Ukraine, in Russia now, Russian lawmakers taking part in peace talks with Kyiv ask the country to consider death penalty for what they call nationalist fighters from Ukraine's Azov regiment. Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Let's begin with the developments in the Russian invasion. A Russian lawmaker taking part in peace talks with Kyiv wants Russia to consider the death penalty for the Ukrainian soldiers being evacuated from the Azovstal steel plant. He referred to the soldiers as nationalist fighters. In a debate in the State Duma, the lower house of Russia's parliament, after the defenders of Ukraine's Azovstal steelworks surrendered, lawmaker Leonid Snosky said although Russia has a moratorium on the death penalty, it should think carefully about capital punishments for the Azov fighters. In his words, they do not deserve to live after the monstrous crimes against humanity that they have committed and that are committed continuously against our prisoners. Lawmakers at the State Duma were discussing the possibility of a ban on the exchange of fighters from the Azov regiment for Russian servicemen, initially proposed by Deputy Anatoly Veseman, according to a telegram. One Russian media agency quoted the speaker as saying Nazi criminals should not be exchanged. Here's more in this report.
Ukrainian's military ceded control of the strategic port city of Mariupol to Russia on Tuesday, announcing it was working to evacuate all remaining troops from their last stronghold in the Azovstal steel plant. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky stressed the importance of saving lives in his nightly address.
As regards the situation in Mariupol, thanks to the actions of the Ukrainian military, Armed Forces of Ukraine, Intelligence Negotiating Group, the international community of the Red Cross and the United Nations, we hope that we will be able to save the lives of our guys. There are severely wounded ones among them. They are given care. I want to stress out, Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive.
According to reports, 5 buses were seen carrying troops from Azovstal arriving in Novoazovsk late Monday. Some of the evacuated troops were wounded and carried out of the buses on stretchers. Some 600 troops were believed to have been inside the steel plant. Russian state-run media outlets also posted footage of what they say were injured Ukrainian soldiers being evacuated from Azovstal. They are expected to be exchanged for Russian prisoners of war. Meanwhile, over Sweden and Finland's NATO bids, President Vladimir Putin appeared to climb down from Russia's objections to both countries joining NATO, saying the countries poses no direct threat to them. However, the expansion of military infrastructure into his territory would certainly provoke the response.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, welcome. It's great to have you here.
US President Joe Biden met with the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C., saying they would discuss their ongoing support for Ukraine and trade partnerships. Mitsotakis described the US-Greek relationship at an all-time high and that the two countries were facing united the challenge of Russia's invasion into Ukraine.
Sadly, Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine is also about threat to democracy from autocrats and want to bear down on rules-tested orders and rule-based orders. I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for Greece's moral leadership here. It's not easy, I know, but thank you. And we have much to discuss today, our ongoing support for Ukraine, our deepening defense and trade partnerships, energy security, climate change, and so much more.
Two countries have always been on the right side of history. We fought in wars together. And of course, we are now facing united the challenge of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. At the same time, this visit is an opportunity to reassess the status of our relationship.
Last week, Greece's parliament approved the renewal and amendment of a defense cooperation agreement with the United States. First signed in 1990, it allows U.S. forces to train and operate in Greek territory. The latest amendment, agreed in 2021, extends the cooperation by allowing the presence of U.S. forces in 4 more military areas. Mitsotakis told Parliament the agreement shields the country against security threats, and that agreement grows in importance against the backdrop of the war in Europe.
In the meantime, Finnish President Sauli Niinistö has begun a 2-day visit to Sweden. He met with King Carl Gustaf. Both men travelled to the royal palace in a horse-drawn carriage. They both said the visit would focus on Finland and Sweden's decision to join NATO. After the meeting at the palace, Niinistö is scheduled to address the Swedish parliament and then meet Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson. The decisions by Finland and Sweden to apply to NATO set the two countries on a path towards ending policies of military non-alignments that have defined their defence strategies since the start of the Cold War. But the accession process hit a snag when NATO member Turkey's president said he would not approve either bid. The VOA's Anna Chernikova is in Kyiv. Anna, great to see you. We're trying to understand, what happened at the Azov steel plant today. Did the soldiers surrender, and then on what conditions?
Hi. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't really announce or seem a surrender. What we know is that it was an agreement for evacuation, which was in work for the past couple of weeks, is what we know from the Ukrainian officials. What we also know is what President Zelensky confirmed in his late evening speech, that this evacuation was organized and realized by the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian intelligence, as well as international partners, International Red Cross organization, and the representatives of the UN. So this more looks like an evacuation in order to exchange soldiers. And this is exactly what is the plan, according to Ukrainian officials. So for the moment, we know that 53 heavy injured soldiers were evacuated from Azovstal. In addition, 211 soldiers were also evacuated. So all these people are waiting for to be exchanged to Russian soldiers. It's really very delicate situation, as what also President Zelensky mentioned. How it looks, and what we can definitely say, that it was a certain agreement done. So otherwise it would never be possible.
Yeah, quite a confusing situation there. But the soldiers which are being evacuated from Azovstal are being moved to Russian-held territories. And one in the parliament is discussing what could happen to them. One of them is even calling for the death penalty. What really is the fate of these soldiers?
So this is true. For the moment, Ukrainian soldiers are evacuated to the Russian-controlled territory in Donetsk region. What we've heard from the representatives of the Russian parliament, what they propose to vote, if I remember correctly, tomorrow. It looks a little bit, different from the agreement that was announced by the Ukrainian side, definitely. What we know from the Ukrainian official, from the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, that Anna Maler, she confirmed that negotiations are very difficult, but they're still ongoing. And she said that what basically Russian Parliament was saying today, she thinks, and she presented it more as as a certain internal politic communication for Russian society and Russian political organizations. She says that negotiations still going, and negotiations are as follows: that all Ukrainian soldiers would be exchanged. Of course, here in Ukraine, there are different emotions on that. Everyone understands that probably it was very difficult to reach at least any agreement, and everyone understands that the most important is to save life of Ukrainian soldiers. But again, there is no, within the society, there is definitely no 100% belief that all the agreements would be fulfilled, because these agreements with Russia. So this is how society is reacting to that. I really hope that that negotiations would go on, and that these announcements by Russian government in terms of Azov battalion would not going to turn truth, because Azov battalion is not, it's not anymore a battalion separated from Ukrainian army. It's a part of Ukrainian army, so it's not as Russian government called it, Nazi or whatever. So we just hope that the agreement would work and every soldier would come back to Ukraine.
Talking about negotiations, Anna, Russia is saying that Ukraine has practically withdrawn from the negotiations, while blaming Kyiv for Moscow failing to compromise. I know that this concerns the peace talks that are supposed to be taking place. What is the likelihood that a common ground can still be found now?
What we know from the advisor to the head of president office, Mr. Podolak, he today announced that the negotiations are suspended. They are suspended due to different reasons and a lot of difficulties within these negotiations that unfortunately the Russian side is not, according to him again, is not ready to negotiate, and they continue to try to put their own decisions as the only and final. So what he said, that negotiations should continue at one point, but again, it will be possible only when Russian side would show signs of readiness for this negotiation. So I think that for the moment, and this is what it seems from the official comments of this situation, that Ukrainian side is ready to negotiate, but Ukrainian side understands very well that the main negotiation is happening at the battlefield, and there are a lot of activities going on, and a lot of positive activities for Ukrainian army and Ukrainian and Ukraine. The country is happening in the Kharkiv region and in Donetsk region and Kherson region. So I think that Ukrainian side is waiting for the best moment to continue these negotiations. I think that. Again, what President Zelensky mentioned before, that if situation with Mariupol would not be solved in a way that Ukrainian soldiers are coming back alive, and so in any kind of final agreement, but they should come back alive. If that's not going to happen, then negotiation would not continue. So we hope that maybe this evacuation is actually a sign that if finally the soldiers are back to Ukraine, negotiation could continue. But again, we'll see.
Indeed, we'll see. We're hoping those soldiers come back alive. Anna, just before you go, Sweden and Finland did announce over the weekend they will be joining NATO. And I know that that's something Ukraine wanted before this war, which is the reason why this war is even currently on. How does the Ukrainian president feel knowing that NATO is willing to welcome Sweden and Finland with open arms, and the fact that, Russia, even though threatening Finland, still hasn't done anything about, their NATO membership bids?
Mr. Zelensky said both in his speech to Ukrainian nation and also to the president of Finland in particular that definitely he supports and Ukraine supports the decision of Finland. It's a very logical decision, and especially taking into consideration what had happened and of the behavior of Russia. Of course, Finland has a very long border with this country, and it's quite a logical step that they decided finally to join NATO. President Zelensky also highlighted that situation now is a very different situation in terms of politics, in terms of economy, in terms of military strength of Russia and the world, and that probably this decision is quite on time. By Finland and by Sweden. So Ukrainian society and Ukrainian government sees it quite obvious that they did it. In terms of Ukrainian future in this regard, well, it seemed that situation is changing because just recently the representative of the temporary head of the U.S. embassy in Ukraine said that in the future Ukraine could also have this faster route to NATO without any additional procedures as Sweden and Finland did. This is kind of a sign that probably, the society in the NATO states also have their mind changed. And I think that Ukraine, again, we'll see how this war would end and what would be the situation in terms of economic situation, political situation, geopolitical situation, maybe at the end. But I think that this would definitely change and it would be very different than it was before the 21st of February. So it might be also a sign for Ukraine that actually, this is possible, and also taking into consideration the reaction of Russian Federation when they say that, we never said that this could be a problem, while they said, and we all remember that they said that they don't want any countries in at their borders joining NATO. So, battlefield will decide everything. And of course, Ukrainian army is very different from what it was 3 months ago, with different equipment and different, experience. So I think this might change everything for both Ukraine and NATO states.
Indeed, it might change everything, and that's if they can get past Turkey at this time. Anna, thank you again for speaking with us, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
In other news around Ukraine, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has called for U.S. allies to step up financial support for Ukraine, saying funds announced so far would not be sufficient for the country's short-term needs as it battles the Russian invasion. She was speaking at a Brussels Economic Forum earlier today, where she reminded leaders that Ukraine's government has continued to function due to the ingenuity and bravery of the country's officials. With the war shuttering as much as half of Ukraine's economy, the country requires near-term external financing of about $5 billion per month to meet basic needs, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky.
And services. Ukraine's immediate financing needs are significant. Due to the ingenuity and bravery of Ukrainian officials, their government continues to function. But in the months until tax collection can resume at pace, Ukraine needs budget funding to pay soldiers, employees, and pensioners, as well as to operate an economy that meets its citizens' basic needs. In short order, we'll need to turn to repairing and restoring critical utilities and services. Eventually, Ukraine will need massive support and private investment for reconstruction and recovery. And I sincerely ask all our partners to join us in increasing their financial support to Ukraine. Our joint efforts are critical to help ensure Ukraine's democracy prevails over Putin's aggression.
coming up after the break. Britain's Queen Elizabeth makes a surprise appearance at a ceremony to mark the completion of a long-awaited London tube line named in her honour. Welcome back to The World Today. In Russia, jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has appeared by video link at a Moscow court today to appeal a prison sentence handed down to him in March for fraud and contempt of court. Navalny could be seen smoothing down his hair as he joined the proceedings by video from his prison room in Pokryov. That's about 100 kilometers east of Moscow. His lawyers were also present in the courtroom. Reporters were only allowed to film in the courtroom before the proceedings started, and it was later announced that a decision on the appeal would only be announced on May 24. Navalny was sentenced to an additional 9 years in prison on fraud charges in March, a ruling that looked set to keep President Vladimir Putin's most prominent opponent out of active politics for years ahead. The Kremlin critic was also found guilty of contempt of court, had already been serving a 3.5-year sentence for parole violations related to charges he says were trumped up to thwart his political ambition. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin has restated his position that the U.S. biolaboratories in the former Soviet Union state collect biological materials and study the specifics of the spread of dangerous diseases. He was speaking at a Collective Security Treaty Organization anniversary conference in Moscow. Mr. Putin pointed out that the Pentagon is behind those U.S. labs established overseas. According to President Putin, during the special operation in Ukraine, documentary evidence was obtained that components of biological weapons were developed in close proximity to Russia's borders. In March, Russia revealed the presence of 30 biological laboratories that were operated on the orders of the U.S. Department of Defense and could be involved in constructing biological weapons. Israel says Iran is working on advanced uranium centrifuges at new underground sites being built near its Natanz nuclear plant. Defense Minister Benny Gantz, speaking at a university near Tel Aviv, also gave figures that appear to go beyond those published by a UN watchdog. Centrifuges are used to purify uranium for civilian projects or at higher levels to make a bomb fuel. Iranian progress in the field is being watched by world powers trying to resurrect nuclear deal with Tehran, which denies having military designs. Mr. Gantz says Israel is making an effort to complete the manufacturing and installation of 1,000 additional advanced IR-6 centrifuges in its nuclear facilities. We're in the United States now, where lawmakers have begun congressional hearing into UFO sightings in the U.S. in over 50 years. The hearing is being held in the House Intelligence, Counterterrorism, Counterintelligence and Counterproliferation Subcommittee. The two officials testifying are Ronald Moultrie, and the Pentagon's top intelligence official, and Scott Bray, the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. Following the public hearing, the committee will close its doors for a private classified session with lawmakers. Ahead of that hearing, scientists and experts have written draft questions that they hope lawmakers will ask the witnesses. Christopher Mellon, a former top Pentagon intelligence official and critic of the government's handling of UAP evidence, said most important question to ask is whether any have been observed outside Earth's atmosphere. He said earlier, if members can confirm UAP in space, they'll make history and help to eliminate an entire category of potential explanations having to do with atmospheric phenomenon, Chinese lanterns, civilian drones, and so on. But President Joe Biden is in Buffalo today, just days after the fatal shooting of 10 people by an 18-year-old white male who remains in custody. The president laid flowers at a makeshift memorial for victims of the shooting ahead of a meeting with families of the victims and the community. Accompanying him is First Lady Jill Biden and a variety of New York political leaders who stopped by later to the memorial, which was set up under a tree to pay respects near the supermarket where the gunfire rang out. Authorities say Peyton Gendron, the gunman, carried out an act of racially motivated violent extremism when he opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle on Saturday at the Tops Friendly Market in a predominantly African-American neighborhood of Buffalo, New York. He struck 13 people with gunfire, killing 10 of them. Now, as can be imagined, residents of Buffalo City are still shaken by the horrific shootings. They have strongly condemned the hate killings thought to have been fueled by white supremacy. Nearly 80% of the residents where the tragedy took place are African Americans and members of this close-knit community. They say they know each other. After the attack, many have been sad to find familiar names on the list of victims. The gunman, Peyton Gendron, live-streamed his mass shooting. He surrendered to local police and was taken into custody and transported to Buffalo Police Headquarters. According to initial investigations, it was found the murderer had visited the market in March and planned to kill more people in other places.
The ladies that was murdered was an 86-year-old woman by the name of Ruth Whitfield, who I know personally.
He stand between the bullet. He did his best. And that's why I really want to leave it like this. It's kind of hurt me.
No mental health issues, none of that, because he wasn't crazy. If he knew how to get here and he knew what he did, he knew what he was doing. So mental health issues, no. No, I don't think that's going to go over well with the Buffalo community.
Being a black man in the United States of America, not just Buffalo, New York, being a black man in the United States of America, we are targeted every day. Whether it be by law enforcement, whether it be by white supremacists, we are targeted. Driving in my
Joining me now is U.S. and International Affairs analyst Calvin Darkis in Washington. Calvin, great to see you. And, you know, it saddens me when we have to talk about shootings in the United States. You can feel, you know, the sadness of the community, you know, as you watch those responders just talking about what the community was like, how everyone knew everyone. It kind of reminds you, though, the shootings of what of America in the past. I mean, under former President Barack Obama, a time where there were more mass shootings, when there were rampant. What could be instigating these attacks right now?
Well, I think, you know, it's a really complicated question, but the two things that come to mind, first of all, are guns. Our unfortunate obsession and addiction to guns in this country fuels a lot of the mass shootings that, you know, we see and have seen throughout the last few years. And I think the second thing is the rise of white supremacy, or rather the rise of expressing it, that people are more open to say and unfortunately do things based on racism and white supremacy. So I think it's both.
Yeah, and I know authorities have defined this as an act of racism, but where do you draw the line? It does kind of sound a bit like domestic terrorism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I actually don't think you have to even draw a line. I think it's both, because we think about the definition of domestic terrorism, that it's an act of violence that not only victimizes those who are hurt or killed, but instills fear in specific communities. In this case, it was domestic terrorism because it not only inflicted horrible pain on the people that were there and their families in that community, but on other African Americans that the alleged gunman said that he was wanting to target. So I think in this case, it's both.
Yeah, and I noticed that many of the victims, Calvin, were senior citizens above the age of 50, 60. Some of them giving you the sense that this was supposedly a peaceful community. You had senior citizens or mainly living in this area in Buffalo City, well, this particular area close to the supermarket. So apart from targeting African Americans, it's clear the gunman wanted to target a community where there would be the least bit of resistance.
Yes, it's hard to imagine, you know, exactly what was going on through his head. I don't know if he was necessarily targeting, you know, least resistance or elderly because, you know, he was heavily armed. I think I even read an account that the security guard there fired at him or some way responded, but because of his tactical gear, it didn't stop him. What I do think is, you know, he picked Saturday afternoon when people of all ages in that community are going to do their grocery shopping. And I think that was probably the bigger motivation, because that's something that I think everybody in that community, probably everybody in the United States, can identify with.
And what happens now, Calvin? I mean, this is just another young man who's been taken into custody, but there are many of them out there who are still radicalized, being radicalized in the United States, and that's a major problem.
You're exactly right. I think that what should happen now is we should have stronger hate crime laws that let people know that it's not just a tragedy of what happens, but of the people that it instills fear in. We need to reform our justice system and our system of policing. And of course, we need to get our guns under control. Most of those things, unfortunately, that I've named do not have support by our political leaders, particularly on the right in the Republican Party.
And speaking of which, President Biden is in Buffalo today. What could he do? What could he say as he meets, with the families of these victims, as to ensure, that there are more police checks, that, this incident does not reoccur, and that, he minimizes, the number of condolence messages and these kinds of trips that he has to make in the near future?
I think there are two things to kind of think about with Biden's visit there. One is he's kind of developed the name we use in the United States here as the comforter in chief. He is very good with that. We're all familiar that he has had personal family tragedies in his own life, and that has made him empathetic, which is what a lot of people identify with and need at this time. But the second thing is, let's remember, he announced his candidacy for president around combating the hate from the Charlottesville incident that was in great contrast with his running opponent at the time, Donald Trump. So this is Biden not only comforting, but reiterating that initial message that he wanted to try to get to the root of solving this problem.
Is it important at this time to hear from the former president, Barack Obama? He had tried, to have those gun laws signed. Unfortunately, couldn't achieve that before his tenure was over.
I think any show of support will be helpful, but when it comes to actually doing something, I don't really think it can affect much. And that's not a reflection on Barack Obama. It's a reflection on the people who are in office now. I remember one of the things Barack Obama said that I think is really key is after Sandy Hook, when kindergartners, first graders were killed, he said, if that didn't move America to change our gun laws, what will? And unfortunately, I think that's still true so many years later.
Calvin, thanks again for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Well, Britain's Queen Elizabeth today made a surprise appearance at a ceremony to mark the completion of a long-awaited London Tube line named in her honour. Her Majesty, wearing a bright yellow hat and coat and using a walking stick, unveiled a plaque at Paddington Station. She was joined by her son Edward and Prime Minister Boris Johnson. It's the latest public outing for the 96-year-old monarch who, despite missing a speech in Parliament last week due to mobility issues, twice attended a horse show at her Windsor Castle residence in recent days. During her visit, the Queen was presented with an Oyster card, a type of card used on London's tube train lines, and was shown how to use the ticket machine. She asked a staff member, where might I go? The staff member explained that she could go to Abbey Wood in southeast London, which will now be connected with central London in record time. Would I be asking the same question, where will the Queen go on the trains? British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said the government needs to consider legislation in parallel with holding talks with the European Union on getting changes to post-Brexit trade rules for Northern Ireland. Mr Johnson's government agreed to a protocol which created a customs border in the sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. But now it seems the required bureaucracy is intolerable and that a trade war is not likely.
Is getting rid of some relatively minor barriers to... I don't think that is likely, but what we have to fix is the problems with the Northern Ireland political situation, where you can't get the executive up and running right now. In the past, we've done all sorts of things to fix that. We need to address the problems with the protocol. What that actually involves is getting rid of some relatively minor barriers to trade, and I think there are good, commonsensical, pragmatic solutions. We need to work with our EU friends to achieve it. I think the higher duty of the UK government is to, in international law, is to the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process, and that's the thing we have to really look to, and of necessity, we can make some changes, I think, to the protocol, which is not the law of the Medes and the Persians. I agree. It's there in Article 13.8 that if things aren't working, you can change it. Plus, it makes it very clear on the face of the text that you should ensure the East-West trade and the integrity of the UK internal market. So let's fix it. We don't want to nix it, we want to fix it, and we want to work with our EU partners to do it. I think that the case for Sweden and Finland coming in is very good. The Swedes and the Finns have made an absolutely historic decision, and I think that mature consideration by all friends and partners in NATO will invite everybody to conclude that this is the right way forward.
Still in the UK, the Bank of England's Governor Andrew Bailey has raised the alarm on rising food prices, which he says have been pushed up by the conflict in Ukraine. Speaking to the UK Parliament's Treasury Select Committee, Mr. Bailey apologised for the apocalyptic moment, but says that is a major concern, not just for Britain, but for developing economies. He says food prices are likely to be affected by the war in Ukraine, which is a major global producer of wheat and cooking oil, but is unable to export these goods from its ports during the conflict. He, however, dismissed concerns that the Bank of England should have implemented interest rate rises earlier in anticipation of the rising prices.
I am going to sound, I guess, rather apocalyptic about is food. So when I was in Washington at the IMF World Bank Spring meetings a month or so ago, and we had the Ukrainian finance minister there. I did spend most of my time in meetings. People think I spent most of my time walking out of meetings. I didn't actually, but only when the Russian finance minister came on. But I have to tell you that I think this is a big concern, because I think two things that the Ukrainian finance minister said. One is Ukraine does have food in store, but it can't get it out at the moment. Two, while he was optimistic about crop planting, as you know, Ukraine is a major supplier of wheat, major supplier of oil, of cooking oils. And he said, he was pretty optimistic about planting, interestingly, but he said at the moment, we have no way of shipping it out. As things stand at the moment, it's getting worse. And that is a major worry, and it's not just, I have to tell you, a major worry for this country, it is a major worry for the developing world as well. And so if I had to sorry for being apocalyptic for a moment, but that's a major concern. There's been a series of supply shocks going on most recently, and this really is a big factor in the change since we were last here, and in the May report, the impact of the war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And of course, we find, I'm afraid we do, as others do, we can't predict things like wars. That's as you, I think, were implying, that's not really in our power. I'm not sure it's anybody's power, really.
Checking in on North Korea, factories and grocery stores in the capital, Pyongyang, remain open in spite of a coronavirus wave sweeping across the country. In footage provided by the North's official news agency, employees at Pyongyang Dental Hygiene Products Factory were seen running machines to produce tubes of toothpaste, while staff at Mirai Grocery Store and a pharmacy in Taesong District continued working with face masks on. The isolated country is grappling with its first acknowledged COVID-19 outbreak, which it confirmed last week, fueling concerns of a major crisis due to a lack of vaccines and adequate medical infrastructure. The State Emergency Epidemic Prevention Headquarters reported over 269,000 more people have reported fever symptoms, bringing the total to 1.48 million who could have COVID at the moment, while the death toll has grown by 6 to 56 as of Monday evening. Meanwhile, the total of 16 major projects have restarted in Shanghai, China, as the city has largely brought the latest resurgence of the epidemic under control. An official said at a press conference today that Shanghai reported 77 locally confirmed COVID cases and 746 asymptomatic cases. Deputy Director of Shanghai Municipal Commission of Housing and Urban Rural Development, Zhu Zhenhao, said other projects are also preparing for reopening besides these, referring to the 16 areas. Earlier this month, the Shanghai Municipal Commission of Housing and Urban Rural Development released the first whitelist of major construction sites to be reopened in Shanghai, involving a total of 24 projects focusing on site safety and safe operation of the city and covering the technology industry, urban infrastructure, people's livelihood, and other important areas. So thanks to that support, cooperation and joint efforts of all parties, 16 of the first 24 projects have been resumed and 8 are under preparation for reopening. We have more coming up on The World Today Plus. Well, if you want to be like Mike, you got to wear it like Mike and wear what Mike wears. I'm talking about the new Jordan sneakers, where the Air Jordan sneakers going for $10,000 to $4 million from the career of basketball legend Michael Jordan. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today right here on Channels Television. A dramatic video showing a moment a Colombian robbery victim ran over a couple of armed muggers traveling on board a motorbike with his vehicle on a busy road in Colombia's capital on Saturday is making waves on social media. That video obtained by a news agency showed the moment thieves on a motorbike pointed a gun at 28-year-old Colombian criminal lawyer Angelo Schiavinato, who in turn accelerated and hit the two men who then fell to the ground. Schiavinato said the two armed assailants had pointed a gun at his head and asked him to hand over his belongings while he was out driving his convertible with the hood down at traffic lights in Bogota. The thieves had just taken a Cartier watch worth $10,000, to 2 cell phones, a necklace from Schiavinato, and his assistant. The robbers then threatened the pair and fired shots, but Schiavinato accelerated and drove into them. Yeah, there are the pictures. The thieves fell to the ground and tried to get away, but Colombian police officers managed to arrest them. Both men will be prosecuted for the crime of aggravated theft and the illegal carrying of firearms. Well, you think the Ukrainian war might be the biggest thing on the planet, but there is even a bigger problem, and that's hunger and malnourishment of children around the world. United Nations is drawing attention to what's currently going on and says more malnourished children are springing up across the world because of the combined effects of the coronavirus pandemic, climate change, and of course, armed conflicts. The UN's Children's Fund, UNICEF, says treating them has become more expensive because of the rising cost of therapeutic food. The agency highlights 2 regions, Afghanistan and the Horn of Africa, as being particularly at risk.
The United Nations Children's Fund warned in a new child alert that the number of children with severe wasting was rising even before the war in Ukraine threatened to plunge the world deeper into a spiraling global food crisis, and the situation is getting worse. An overlooked child survival emergency shows that in spite of rising levels of severe wasting in children and rising costs for life-saving treatment, global financing to save the lives of children suffering from wasting is also under threat.
I'm here in Gade, in Somali region, Ethiopia, where 3 consecutive failed rainy seasons have left children on the brink of starvation. Across the Horn of Africa, at least 10 million children are facing severe drought. More than 1.7 million of these children are severely wasted, like some of the children seeking treatment here in this field hospital. If the rains fail again, this number could rise to over 2 million severely wasted children.
Currently, at least 10 million severely wasted children do not have access to the most effective treatments for wasting.
Worldwide, a staggering 14 million children under the age of 5 suffer from severe wasting. About a quarter of them live in emergency zones, like this part of Ethiopia. But 2/3 live in places that are not facing humanitarian crises, including Bangladesh and India. Every one of these children needs immediate care to avoid lasting damage to their bodies, their developing brains, and even death.
Meanwhile, the price of ready-to-use therapeutic food is projected to increase by up to 16% over the next 6 months due to a sharp rise in the cost of raw materials.
When severe malnutrition combines with disease outbreaks, as is happening right here in Gade, mortality can spike suddenly. We cannot let this happen. Severe wasting is treatable with inexpensive, ready-to-use therapeutic foods that are proven to save lives. In fact, nutrition support is among the most effective and cost-effective interventions. And yet, every year, around 10 million children who need treatment for severe wasting go without this simple life-saving treatment.
Severe wasting is a situation where children are too thin for their height, resulting in weakened immune systems, which is the most immediate, visible, and life-threatening form of malnutrition. Worldwide, at least 13.6 million children under 5 suffer from severe wasting, resulting in 1 in 5 deaths among the age group. The Child Alert also notes that even countries in relative stability, such as Uganda, have seen a 40% or more increase in child wasting since 2016. Climate-related shocks, including droughts and inadequate access to clean water and sanitation services, are contributing to the rising numbers.
The many realities of the world. Well, Nigerian entrepreneur Mustafa Gajibo has been converting petrol minibuses into electric vehicles at his workshop. But he's now going a step further to build a 12-seater battery-powered bus fitted with home-style air conditioning. He hopes to promote clean energy and curb pollution and make electric vehicles a better alternative in Nigeria. Let's watch.
Passengers scramble to enter Mohammed Lawan's minibus, locally known as Berbera, at a bus stop in Maiduguri. The minibus gives passengers more comfort, lower transport fare, while also being environmentally safe. Lawan's bus is one of several newly converted electric buses that's being distributed to drivers in the state.
Customers are enjoying the car because they are sitting comfortable. Those that are using fuel, they are taking them 4 per seat and 70 naira. Our car, we are carrying them 3 per seat, and it's 50 naira. So the car is very, very nice, very, very okay.
The bus is a brainchild of the Nigerian entrepreneur Mustafa Gajibo, who has been converting petrol minibuses into electric vehicles at his workshop. The university dropout and resident of Maiduguri in Nigeria's northeast says rising global oil prices and pollution caused by fuel cars inspired him to start converting the buses to electric vehicles.
You can see we always have prices of fuel are going up, prices of transportation are also going up, and then you can see the damages normal vehicles, that's the petrol-powered vehicles, diesel-powered vehicles, are causing to our environment. So I came up with this technology to solve all this problem.
For now, Gajibo has one charging station powered by solar.
Cost is a very key thing we put into consideration when designing our buses and our vehicles at large, because it doesn't make sense to produce a technology that people cannot afford. So we are always trying to see how we bring down the cost of our production, so as our selling cost will be also affordable for people.
For driver Mohammed Lawan, who has been unemployed in the past 4 years since he left school, is getting so many passengers and now making enough money and finally thinking of getting a wife.
Since when I finished my school, I have no job, but for now, as I get the job, all my plan now is all about to have the family. Because as I got this job now, I thank God, now I can face the family issues.
Gajibo's most ambitious project is building a vehicle from scratch. When done, it can cover up to 200 kilometers on one charge. He plans to unveil the bus before the end of May. There are other hurdles like foreign currency shortages that make it difficult to import parts, so he's looking to source inside Nigeria.
And get your credit cards ready and head on now to Christie's Auction House. If you're a big fan of Michael Jordan, that's because they will be auctioning off 5 sneakers and a card from the career of the basketball legend. The auction house is expecting the items to garner roughly $4 million during the 2-week auction, which will run from June 1st to the 14th. The number of 6 items is no coincidence. It's a reference to the 6 NBA championships that Michael Jordan led his Chicago Bulls to in the 1990s. The show is entitled 6 Rings, Legacy of the GOAT, referring to the greatest of all time. As Caitlin Donovan, the head of the sneakers and streetwear department at Christie's, explains, Jordan really was the godfather of the father of the secondary sneaker market.
This will be the first rookie card, basketball card, that we're selling here at Christie's. What's amazing about this card is it's really kind of the unicorn of the card collecting community. It's a original Fleer rookie card of Michael Jordan from 85-86. And then the card itself was, for the 20th anniversary, Upper Deck released 23 cards, that number being symbolic to any Michael Jordan fan, 14 of which are known, all signed, and then this card is graded. So it's graded by Beckett Grading Services, which is the most stringent of the grading services, and has an 8.5. So this being an exceptional card, incredibly rare. So we're expecting a price of around $2 to $3 million. So here we have 5 shoes, which will be in the upcoming auction, 6 rings. So the 5 shoes, this pair being one of the earliest pairs of Jordans in this condition, original Jordans, that are on existence in the market. So in 1985, when this whole Michael Jordan journey began, this was the first pair, this was the Jordan 1s, this is where it all began. So this is kind of like the father of the sneaker collecting world and community. This pair being in perfect condition and being an original pair. These 3 are different iterations of Jordans over the years, all being important in their own way, and really leading up to this final pair. This pair being a pair which you actually will see in the Last Dance documentary, which we touched on. This was worn in his second to last game ever played as a Chicago Bull.
Oh, wow. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. See you later.